was making like my reintroduction video, and I mentioned something at the end of it that got me to thinking this would be an interesting topic to talk about. And that was that I actually have watched Thomas Sanders' YouTube channel. Okay, so I'm guessing if you clicked on this because of the title, you may have watched Thomas Sanders. He is a YouTuber who makes content kind of about mental health through acting out conversations with himself. I know it sounds weird, but it's actually really funny. And I found his content and got into it years ago because I think one of my sisters had found it, recommended it. And they told me, oh, he's gay, like, by the way, but we think, like, you know, his content is still funny. Now, as you guys know, I was raised Christian and not progressive Christian, I'll put it that way. So I even, like, showed this content to, like, my dad. That was a bold choice on my part. So, yeah. Let's say, like, the background with my family is not the most progressive background, so it's kind of odd that my sisters and I got into this. My parents kind of let us pick what we would watch. Since, like, then, I've watched a lot of shows with LGBTQ content without really planning to for that specific reason. I watched She-Ra, Princess of Power, the new one. I've watched, The Dragon Prince, basically any show on Netflix now has this kind of content. I don't boycott, like, movies that have gay characters in them, I guess. I've also watched Modern Family. I actually didn't know there was a gay couple on that show when I first clicked on it. It made a lot more sense after I started watching it. Why I had heard like Thomas Sanders quote it like in his videos. I was like, oh, that's where he got that from. And yeah. Now, like, why am I talking about this? It's not to virtue signal, and it's not to say that because I endorse LGBTQ lifestyle, it's kind of like complicated. Well, actually, it's not complicated. And I'm gonna say this is for me personally, not for Christians in general, because everybody's different. But I personally don't object to watching content that has this representation in it if, like, I find something else about it to like. And before you get, like, all up in arms, like, well, but Natasha, like, you're kind of still saying that content's a problem. Like, I'll be honest, it does not align with my religious beliefs to support that content. However, I also think it doesn't align with my religious beliefs to just hate, like, everybody, like, who represents that or any content that happens to include it, because I feel like that's a little hypocritical when Christians do that. I'm like, I think, like, there's only, like, really one kind of Christian who can make a case for that not being hypocritical, and that's the one who avoids any and all worldly content altogether. But most of the ones I know who object to this stuff are not that person. Like, you see, like, those angry, like, comments by, like, far-right people, you know, under this content. Those are not always Christians, by the way. They can just be far-right. They don't have to be Christian to be far-right, but, like, attacking it for promoting this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, I imagine you knew going into it, though, that it had sexual content based on what the rest of the storyline was about. And that's also, biblically, at least, considered unethical. But you were okay with that, but, like, you're not okay with the LGBTQ thing. Well, I can't get maybe that bothers you personally more. But, like, if you're going to about a show for promoting worldly stuff or non-Christian stuff, like, why are you going to watch the rest of it at all? I'm like, were you watching the show up till that point? They introduced that even though it had other, like, stuff that's not right? Because then I think maybe you kind of have, like, double standard there. So I'm like, well, either solution here is just to not watch those shows at all, which is certainly a viable solution. And if God ever leads me that direction, then I probably will just stop watching that content completely. But if I do, it's not going to be just because it's promoting that. It's going to be because I view it as a problem in my spiritual walk for other reasons. Like, the worldly content itself is just the problem. And I have gone through seasons where I've cut out all worldly content to focus more on Christian values. And yes, then I would cut out shows with any sexual even if it was mild, like just any whatsoever, because of that. And story, and I mean other worldly content, like, but in my mind, like shows that promote atheism, evolution, Buddhism could all also be considered problematic. There are Christians who wouldn't even watch Avatar: The Last Airbender TV series, which is great. It has a lot of, I think, Christian values in it, because technically the religion of the show is Buddhism, Hinduism, Eastern, that kind of thing, just like there are a lot of Christians who won't watch anime for that reason. Which I think is actually one of the least problematic reasons not to watch anime, but because there's so many better reasons to avoid anime besides that it's Eastern religion promoting. But like, that's speaking to someone who doesn't watch some anime but has veered away from the anime community because of how disgusting a lot of like popular anime have gotten. And I feel like it's gotten worse. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's gotten better, but like a lot of the classics were just so bad. But that's a subject for another video. Given all this, the reason I choose not to boycott those shows is because I think that's kind of like saying that that particular sin that does not line up with my lifestyle is worse than any other sin that doesn't line up. And I could be watching a movie that has someone doing coke, like, like pot, murder, sexual assault, like adultery in it, and a lot of Christians are not going to say anything about that, but as soon as it has a LGBTQ character, even if they're not practicing it like on screen, they just are LGBTQ, and they are because they say it, that's suddenly like the most unholy, like evil, like movie ever. That just doesn't make any sense to me. I know like a lot of people, like here's an example, like Disney's Jungle Cruise. I actually enjoyed that movie. I know a lot of Christians did not like that her brother was implied to be gay. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, he was the best character in the movie. Hands down. Sorry to The Rock, but he was the funniest character. McGregor, he was hilarious. And like, yeah, I knew he was supposed to be gay, but honestly, they were pretty subtle about it. And like to the point where like a kid wouldn't even like understand this. So if you're worried about like them shoving their agenda down your throat, this is honestly probably the least concerning way I've seen them do it since they started putting this stuff in their movies to begin with. Now I'm not saying that they should include it at all. I think the tricky thing here is I don't think Christians have the right to dictate what other people put in their content. Because that's kind of telling other people how to live who don't share our beliefs. And I don't find that very biblical. Like nowhere in the New Testament does it say to force like people in the world to not do what they do. It's not in the New Testament to do that. Don't support it maybe, but you can't force them to comply. And Paul even says, and this is kind of where I get my opinion from, that to avoid people who live a way that Christians are not supposed to live, you'd have to go out of the world. He's like, and I didn't say, he's like, I'm not commanding you to avoid those people. Like, this is literally like in the scripture. He says, I'm commanding you to avoid people in the church who practice like stuff that is against their religion because they're hypocrites. And that's like, frankly, where I stand. Being where I live, which is in a very progressive area, I'll just put it that way, I run into people who don't agree with my worldview quite openly, like all the time, like everywhere I go. And if I let every little incident bother me, I'd go crazy. Also, I kind of realized years ago that what's the point of being bothered by it? Because these people aren't Christians yet. If they are Christians, they choose to keep practicing stuff that's against their religion, then they're hypocrites. That's God's business to deal with them, and I certainly would not support that. But a lot of people just don't know, for one thing, like exactly where the Bible stands on the subject, and also you can't expect people who are creating art that is not Christian to follow Christian standards. So if you're going to engage with the world market in that way, you're going to have to be prepared for it to go against your beliefs. Either, like Paul says, you have a strong enough conscience to say this isn't going to affect me, like this is their business, or if you're weak, you feel like it is going to affect you, then you choose to avoid it, but you don't force that. Paul's very clear about this on other people because it's their business to settle that with God. And that's why I don't really talk about engaging with this content usually to too many people, because I know that not everybody it can handle it, like, with their faith without feeling confused or compromised or guilty. And I'm like, it's not like you have to watch this stuff, like, or participate in it. It's like, you don't have to read a book with a gay character in it if that's a problem for you. It's just not, for me, like, a problem for my faith, because I see it as that is that person's worldview, and I'm not going to be able to avoid people with that worldview my entire life or ever. So I'm like, either you learn to deal with it in a mature way, or I don't actually see, is there a better option? I don't really think so. Like, what are you gonna do? Throw a hissy fit every time you see that? There are people like that, but I don't think that's a biblical way to respond. Now, of course, by bringing up this topic at all, I've invited a lot of ridicule, I know, from that community who's going to attack, but wait, your religion, like, you hate, like people, like gay people. Like, that's not actually what Christianity teaches. First of all, it is not in the Bible, in the New Testament, for Christians to have to hate gay people. It's not a command. We're not commanded to hate anyone. That's ridiculous. Do some Christians hate gay people? Yes. I actually don't understand why. I've actually talked to my cousin about this, who's not a Christian, but he had questions why, like, your Bible, like, says this. He and his friend were asking me, like, that it's wrong to be homosexual. Like, so where do you guys stand on that? And I explained to him that I personally have no feelings, really, of hatred or, like, general, like, disgust with the community, people who practice that lifestyle, and I don't have any personal problem with any of them. You know, I think they have a problem with me, but I'm like, do I feel like I need to hate them? No. Like, do I feel like I need to endorse their lifestyle? No, I also don't think that. The reason I don't think that is I don't think I need to endorse any one lifestyle in particular. Quite frankly, that would be kind of strange. I'm like, I mean, it's like, I don't go around endorsing, like, heterosexual promiscuity either. You know, I'm like, I don't endorse living together, like, before marriage. Like, I don't endorse a lot of things people, like, think is fine. Now, and yes, that happens to be one of them, but I also don't go around screaming at people who, like, live together who aren't married, which would include many people in my family, about, like, oh, you're, like, going to hell, like, you're, like, no, like, see, there's no point. So that's how I explained. Like, I don't personally have a hatred for them, and I don't believe God hates them either. I believe it is against the Bible. I think the Bible's pretty clear that it is against the Bible, but I don't believe it's worse than any other sin. And, you know, if they choose to come to, like, Christ, then it'll get dealt with, like, then. And of course, people are like, well, why do you think it's a sin at all? You know, and to which I said, well, look, I take things on God's authority. You know, which is what offends a lot of people. But it's like, if God in his authority says that it is wrong or bad for people to do something, then I'm going to believe that he has a good reason for it, because everything else he's forbidden, I've been able to find a reason for, you know, either in my life or other people's, you know, and it always turns out that in the long run, doing things God's way works out best. Now, is it unforgivable? No, of course not. And I even explained to him, like, having those temptations isn't even the sin part. It's acting on them, you know. But it also would be sinful to act on sexual temptations as well. Like, even if you're straight. Or, it's like, well, what do you expect us to say? You know, it is against our religion. It's against a lot of religions, actually, not just Christianity, you know. But we're trying to be respectful about it and say that, you know, we don't expect everybody to live the way that we live. There are Christians are different than that. I'm not one of them, you know, and that's why, for that reason, again, I don't avoid this content, because I view it as it's the same as how I couldn't avoid those people. You know, I might as well get to understand them as well as I can. And I think I do understand better what they care about. And I'm like, I mean, I may never get a chance to tell any of them about my faith who believe in this. I have talked to people at church who struggle with that issue about it, and have been able to connect with them fairly well, with understanding and compassion, to where they felt comfortable opening up with me because I didn't judge. You know, I was honest. I said, I don't think this is biblical, but I'm not going to judge you for struggling with it. You know, I think a lot of people do, and I think that a lot of it, if it is something that you want God to take away, like, that will happen. But it's not going to maybe just happen magically overnight. So, and I mean, people change. Like, they do. So, I mean, it's not fair to say, put pressure on someone that you will always be this way and you're, like, doomed, like, blah, blah, blah. And I just think it's just blowing everything way out of proportion to react that way. So that's why I didn't overreact. I'm like, especially like for teenagers, it's totally normal to have questions about that and come to like know your own mind once you're, older or in your 20s even. So it's like, so I feel like people freak out like when like middle school to high schoolers have questions about these issues, but it's completely normal to, and it's like, you don't have to like get the torch and pitchforks out just because they're like not sure, guys. Like, just chill, okay? Like, let them find their maturity, like over time. I think that's honestly part of what drives people out of the church and into this community, is because people overreact to the problem. But that's a whole other side of the issue. But I figure, like, we're supposed to love everybody, right? We don't have to agree with them, but we are supposed to love them. So I actually expose myself to a lot of books, movies, stuff that is about people groups I do not agree with, because I want to understand them better. Uh, I don't know if I want to quote this as a source of truth, but in Ender's Game, like, there's this quote, and I hate that story, so I don't know whether maybe like this is true, but I don't like the story. But like, he says that once he understands his enemy, he loves them. Now, where I think that story is psychotic is that he still destroys them, like, without mercy after that point. I'm like, you don't love anybody who you will destroy without mercy in the way that he does it. I'm sorry. It's really deeply unsettling, actually, and I hated it. But maybe, like, divorced from the actual plot of the book, that quote, I think, does have some truth in it. When you try to understand people, it's a lot easier to sympathize with them. And sometimes that does help you to love them. I believe that love is a choice. It's an attitude. It's not just a feeling. So yeah, that's why I watch stuff like that. Not just for that reason. Like I'm not, it's not like that. It's not that cliche, like, where I'm like, well, I just watch this to become like more in touch with like the woke community so that I could minister with them. Like, no, I admit I genuinely do enjoy this content as well. I just don't let that stop me. I try to see people as people. What a novel idea, regardless of their sexual orientation. So I'm like, if there's something they're saying that I think is true, I don't care who says it. If it's true, it's true. Or if it's funny, it's funny. Like, let's find common ground, guys. Like, please. I'm more saying that as Christians, I believe that it's not our job to control everyone who's not a Christian, and that it's not our job to hate on them and everything they do. Like, we ought to try to find as much as we can, like, to agree with them and to bond over. Like, it's not like good to treat people like they have some kind of disease because they struggle with something that we don't believe is right. People struggle with everything we don't believe is right. And I mean, it's not just the LGBT community. Christians can treat people who have struggled with drugs, like alcohol, any sin really, like they're lepers. And it's like, that's not what Jesus would do, and it's not, I think, what we should be doing either. It's just not. Because that's not love. And it's definitely not Christianity. Like the whole go to people, like, and minister to them part of Christianity. Sometimes I think the modern church in the West teaches people to teach what is right and wrong with their mouths, but not to live it out with their lives. Or they teach them that they have to stand up for their faith by loudly, like, condemning people who live in a way that does not match that faith. And I'm like, the only people we are supposed to condemn are, again, the hypocrites in our midst who do stuff they're not supposed to do. And we don't condemn them enough, in my opinion. Like, going to, like, people, like, outside and, like, screaming at them, that's not Christianity. It's not. You have to remember that the only time Jesus violently, like, you know, did anything, like, in the whole course of his ministry, it was cleansing the temple, you know, of the hypocrites within his own religion. It was not going to a Roman temple and cleansing that. And you gotta look at the kind of ways they worshipped in, like, Greek and Roman temples, so you can understand that if Jesus didn't go around stopping that, then that meant that his bigger priority was stopping corruption within the people who were supposed to have the answers, not within the people who didn't know any better. So that's my state, and it's very controversial. I am well aware to both sides, because I'm definitely not in favor of it enough to please the progressives, and I'm not against it enough to please the ultra-conservatives. It's middle ground for me. I guess. It's not that I don't have strong beliefs. It's that I think there's a time, a place, and a manner to share and act out those beliefs, and I just don't agree with the mainstream idea, I guess, of doing it. I don't think that makes me a hypocritical Christian, though, to say that. Because I'm like, I think this is pretty much how I've been for a long time. Maybe because as a kid, I did try that before I knew better. Never ended well, and it got me to thinking, you know, like, as a kid, like, you're immature, you don't know better, you're just following the example of the adults in your life. So maybe could excuse that. You know, and as a Sunday school teacher, I deal with kids like that all the time who are very, very pushy about their beliefs because it's the way their parents have taught them to be. And I try not to get offended by it because I know, I'm like, I was there once. And, you know, who hasn't been there sometimes with anything we believe in? It takes experience, maturity, and restraint to not shove your beliefs down people's throats. If you haven't been taught it as a kid, you can't be expected to have that. But I think because of those experiences, I self-reflected and was like, you know, I don't think this is WWJD, like, to use the 90s cliche. Sorry, guys. It's just not... Doesn't match Jesus' actions, to my mind. So yeah, well, I could see the hate. You know, maybe like having a low viewership might help me in this case, because otherwise I'd probably get torn apart for this by both sides. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video if you're not dropping the channel after this one. Bye, guys!